Hi, my name is Sydney Rosenau, and this is my presentation for the final uh, course summary video for EFR 506 Multicultural Education. I've included kind of a image on most of my slides that go along with what I'm kind of talking about, as well as a works cited page at the end covering the texts and the images I used. So, looking at my overview, the three books that we have read this semester, Braiding Sweet Grass, Indigenous Wisdom, Scientific Knowledge, and the Teaching of Plants by Robin Wall Kimmerer, Culturally Relevant Pedagogy, Asking a Different Question by Dr. Gloria Ladson Billings, and Ancient and Indigenous Wisdom Traditions in America Towards More Balanced Curricular Representations and Classroom Practices, edited by Ihab D. Abdu and Theodore G. Zervis. So, kind of covering the overarching message. I know the assignment description said to focus on the three main themes that intersect across, which I'm going to talk about here in a moment, but there was sort of an overall message covering all three texts, which was the critique of Western-centric systems and their advocacy for a more holistic, inclusive approach to knowledge. Now, this kind of covers how we're looking at the systems in place that mainly have more of a Western-centric idea, usually tied to Eurocentric systems. And the advocacy piece comes from all three texts that looks at how can we incorporate a more inclusive approach to the knowledge that we're giving students. How can we incorporate some of those cultural aspects into their education that allows them to learn a bit more about themselves, along with kind of the requirements, you could say, for the curriculum. Now, the three main themes, or three of the main themes, I should say, that I'm going to be covering are validating Indigenous / non-Western epistemologies, specifically looking at some of those frameworks in science or education as a whole, reciprocity and relationality, and lastly, decolonizing educational / scientific spaces. So, if we look at our very first one, Theme 1, Validating Indigenous / Non-Western Epistemologies in Education. So looking at, I kind of broke up each of the three texts on the following slides. You'll see it for all three. I broke it up into kind of a point that they covered that falls under this theme in their book. So starting with Abdu and Zervis, theirs was a domination excuse me, domination of Eurocentric narratives in educational spaces. So they gave a lot of praise and sort of highlighted those opportunities and efforts towards integrating inclusive alternatives, which you can see early on in their book, in their introduction, because the kind of neat thing with this text was how they edited a handful of educators and scholars' own writings on different topics that fell under kind of their main focus area. And so when they were looking at it, they looked at how these inclusive alternatives are being integrated into Eurocentric curriculums in post-secondary systems. And we also are seeing it in some of those pre-K through 12 schools as well. There were a couple sections where some of the researchers and scholars focused on how it was impacting elementary schools. Specifically, one I know I highlighted in one of my papers was when they looked at schools in California and how they were trying to integrate some of those opportunities into the social studies area. With that, I thought that they did a really good job covering how Eurocentric narratives seem to be kind of the dominant aspect of the education that students are receiving, and the fact that they're not given more opportunities to explore other aspects of history as well as parts of their identity is a major disservice to our students who do not fit into the white category that has kind of really dominated our society for hundreds of years. Now, number 2 was integration of other cultures into classrooms and curriculum, so kind of embracing that identity piece. And this is where I looked at Ladson Billings' book. She looked at a lot of case studies where teachers have incorporated different cultures into their own teaching, whether that's changing up the way that they're delivering curriculum, or also just adjusting the way that their information is being presented so that it kind of encapsulates different aspects of people's cultures, which allows students to feel more comfortable while learning in that area of exploring their culture and identity. One that I know she highlighted was when a teacher, she incorporated looking at rap songs and breaking down kind of the lyrics and how it was pieced together prior to a poetry unit that they did. So I thought that was pretty neat. I know in my paper I highlighted that because in my own classroom we cover The Crossover, which is by Kwame Alexander, and amazing book. And I really tied with, or I shouldn't say tied, I really connected with that case study that she referred to, because I know a lot of students in my school is predominantly white, my few students of color who were learning about it, I think it was kind of interesting to them to be able to see aspects of their own identities reflected in some of the texts that we were reading. And lastly, combining heritage with Western science. Kimmerer, she talked about how she grew up with Indigenous practices already integrated into her knowledge and general practices that her family did. And she learned that this wasn't an accepted way of thinking. So kind of tying back into my previous 2 points about how the narrative that's being pushed, that's been in place for years within education systems, isn't very welcoming or open-minded to other outside influences or outside pieces of knowledge or areas of knowledge. And I thought Kimmerer did a really good job talking about that. Especially, I found it really interesting learning about how her Indigenous practices that she grew up with is what led her to go into the career and field of botany. And the fact that when she got there, she had professors telling her that, no, this is not the way that you're supposed to be doing this or looking at this or researching this. And I think it was very interesting for her to have learned that early on, because then it impacted how she taught, and then she had to come back and be like, okay, I need to change this up because I'm doing myself a disservice as well as my students. And I think that story that she pulled up talking about her integration of the 3 sisters into one of her kind of intro classes for students, I thought that was really neat. Now, theme number 2 focuses on reciprocity and relationality. So all 3 tie into these 2, but breaking it down a bit more, Kimmerer's whole book really covered reciprocity, so it was kind of hard to pick one thing to focus on, but I really liked this quote near the end of the book. She said, "The moral covenant of reciprocity calls us to honor our responsibilities for all we have been given, for all that we have taken, in return for the privilege of breath." So I really enjoyed how she talked a lot about covering covering the bases of returning, giving what we got. I think that in the world we live in today, it's very consumer driven, it's very capitalist driven, and I think it's hard for us to move past that when these systems have been put in place for years, that we've been slowly taught that this is the way it has to be. And I think that looking at Kimmer's way of thinking, looking at how we can honor the earth, we can honor these things that we are using so that it has that reciprocal aspect to it. It's not just us taking, taking, taking. I think of the times when I've looked at farm fields out here in North Dakota, and you think about how much that soil's been through, how much the land has had to change because of colonialism and just Western expansion in general. And I think we've done not as much in terms of giving back to the earth for what they've given us, or what it's given us, I should say. So I do really agree with this quote, and I really liked Kimmer's stance on everything. Community relations, Ladson Billings covers how there is a need for community within education places. And, I really liked how she broke up that it's not just relations between teachers and students that need to be prioritized. It's also students and their education, and both students and teachers with their communities. All of this affects students' learning. All of this plays a role into student success as well. Ladson Billings' whole book really focused on student success in minorities. Primarily, she was focusing on African American students. And I think that it's really important and integral to their learning to know that that relationship piece exists, not just between them and their teacher, but also with their learning. They have an active role in their learning. It's not just a one-way street. I really liked how she brought up a case study about the Italian teacher who worked in I think it was a primarily Black neighborhood. And she had so many roles in her community. She was on so many committees. She was out and about in the community and active and present. And that played a piece in her students' success as well, because they saw that she cared. They saw that she was making herself a key figure. And that in turn inspires them to start kind of taking on more responsibility with, hey, I do have people who care about me, who want me to succeed. Maybe I need to start stepping up a little bit. And so I thought that was really awesome. And the last one that I have on here is reconciliatory pedagogy. This one is in Abdul Zervas's book, and I really felt that they had some really good information. Sorry, I'm losing my train of thought. They had some really good information regarding reconciliation for us to do as a society with kind of the wrongs and injustices that have been done against minority groups, against non-white individuals. And they pointed out, and as did many of the scholars and researchers that they included in their book, it's more than just those land acknowledgements. It's more than just coming and commenting on it, or having an authoritative figure or a political figure or someone who's in the spotlight stepping up and saying, hey, we apologize on behalf of so-and-so for this atrocity. Or it really makes me think of those residential schools within Canada and the United States. It's more than just coming forward and condoning those actions. it's making that actual change and implementing those different beliefs and knowledge that have continually been cut out of narratives within education, have been continuously bypassed in favor of pushing that Eurocentric narrative that has been prevalent for years. And by us giving them space to have a voice, to have space to feel comfortable to share those aspects of their identity and their culture that keeps getting pushed to the side or silenced, I think that that can make up for some of those past wrongdoings in a way. It's not going to entirely erase what happened, because that is something, it's important for us to keep that alive and present within our minds so that we can avoid doing it again in the future. I do think that there's a long way to go with reconciliation, especially between white people in America with any other minority, but I can say the same for other places across the world, that I feel like we do have a long ways to go still with this, but taking that first step, moving past just these simple acknowledgments, I think can make a really big difference. Okay, and the last theme, decolonizing educational/scientific spaces. So the three things that I'm focusing on in this section are addressing the coloniality mindset within education, schools being inherently political, and breaking through barriers. So starting with the first one, Abdu and Zervis, they looked at how in order for us to move towards a more inclusive learning environment, we need to unsettle our minds as educators. So what that looks like in their words was addressing the coloniality mindset that already exists in a lot of us. I talked a bit about it in my paper that I wrote, but a lot of us have pre-existing biases that we don't even realize just because of how it's been taught to us, the things that we picked up on over the years, the systems already in place that put that bias there, those viewpoints there. As children, it's easy to get influenced by the wrong groups, by the wrong messages. And one of those things includes some of those messages tied into coloniality. So for us as educators, we have to take a step back and acknowledge the things that already exist in us that might be influencing our teaching today without us even realizing it. And so I know one way they talked about that was in order for us to move past the roadblocks or barriers I'm going to talk about in a little bit that are already existing for these students, we need to take a step back and we need to reflect on ourselves and adjust and change our teaching styles, what we're teaching, and our practices so that it does create that inclusive space for students to be able to exist and thrive and feel like they're finally being heard for who they are as a person, rather than getting taught those same Eurocentric narratives that are not, that are not beneficial for anyone. Schools being inherently political. So Ladson Billings, her focus was mainly on looking at student success within African American or Black communities. And one of the things that she really talked about that has been inhibiting or preventing students of color from succeeding is some of those systems that are already in place that are just meant to benefit white individuals mainly. I think that a lot of the systems in place, especially within America, are primarily set for white heterosexual men to succeed, to achieve whatever they set their minds to. But I think that in order for us to move towards a more inclusive style of teaching, a more inclusive education system, we have to dismantle some of those systems. So making sure that we're adjusting curriculum to reflect all groups, not just that white narrative. Making sure that we're not preventing those students of color from having access to other opportunities, to having access to spaces maybe within their school that allow them to celebrate their cultures, to celebrate certain practices or holidays or things like that. Allowing them to partake in certain sports, academics, applying for certain awards even, or scholarships that are primarily dominated by white people. I think that if we can move past all of that, we can see more of our students succeed, especially our students of color. And I think that a lot of those systems that are in place have been set in stone by legislation over the years, where some of that legislation is disguised as being beneficial, but it's not really benefiting anyone but that white narrative. Now, breaking through the barrier, this ties back to a little bit of what I just talked about with Kimmerer, how she integrated aspects of her Indigenous heritage as well as that Indigenous wisdom and knowledge into her teachings, into her practices within the classroom. It's helped deconstruct some of those pre-existing barriers that have been put in place, such as tying into my point above, those systems that are already in place. She experienced when she first went to college, when she had professors telling her, hey, this is not the way of thinking if you want to be an actual botanist. So by her integrating those aspects of her background, it's really helped eliminate some of those barriers that have existed within westernized science spaces and education as a whole. And it's not only benefited her students, but I feel like it's also helped make her a stronger educator as well, and feel like she's honoring those aspects of her heritage that are often silenced. So here's the final question. So what? Why does this matter today? Well, our world is so diverse, so full of many different cultures and many different backgrounds and experiences that are often neglected or not being reflected within education systems, within even just general things we see every day, advertisements, things like that, stores, movies, books. We're slowly starting to see more of that being incorporated as diversity, equity, and inclusion programs start to get on the rise a bit more. However, we do still have legislators and people within the country who are wanting to shut that down, who aren't wanting those voices to succeed, who aren't wanting them to be visible within the world. And so I think it's even more important now than it might have been a few years ago for us to make sure that we are incorporating aspects of students' diverse backgrounds and cultures into that curriculum, into the practices that we carry out within our classrooms as educators. It's so important because it not only allows us to create that space for them to explore who they are, to look further into their culture and their backgrounds, but it also gives us space to reflect as educators and see what we can do to improve not only our teaching styles, but also just our mindsets overall when it comes to what we're practicing, to what we're teaching. And lastly, I think it just can really help make our world a better place by allowing these cultures to exist freely without being crushed down by Eurocentric narratives that have been the dominant feature of society for the last few centuries, I'd say. So, in conclusion, the three books mainly focused on how we can challenge those Western centric systems that are already in place, how we can critique them and look at ways that we can improve them, and how to advocate for that more holistic, inclusive approach to knowledge that we're sharing. Again, the three main themes I discussed were validating Indigenous/non-Western epistemologies in education, reciprocity and relationality, and decolonizing educational and scientific spaces. My final thoughts are, I have always been a big believer in diversity, equity, and inclusion. As someone who comes from a white background, I have been able to dive into different journals, different articles, different posts from people from different backgrounds from mine, and see how inequitable our world is, and to see how often their voices, their narratives are silenced in favor of that Eurocentric one carrying out sort of their big focus of just white people are the dominant group, things like that. I've just been able to learn more about that, and that's really helped me develop a more open-minded approach to a lot of my teaching practices and styles. I have a student right now who we're going to be doing some Anne Frank stuff here at the end of the year, and she's Jewish, and she was like, oh, I want to bring in some Jewish foods so that my classmates can experience that. And just her feeling comfortable enough to do that in my classroom and wanting to do that to educate her classmates about her culture has been so awesome, and it makes me feel really good. And I just hope that I can continue learning more about ways that I can improve as an educator and sort of advocating more for more of these changes to happen. Continuing critiquing these Western-centric systems, looking at ways alongside my fellow educators how we can have a more inclusive approach to the knowledge that we share with students. Here is my works cited, and thank you for listening, Professor Hunter. I really enjoyed this class, and I apologize that my recording is extremely long. But yeah, thank you.